thank you so much again, Vicki and Michelle, for being here with us tonight. We are very excited to see all the delicious autumn themed dishes you are about to demo for us. Vicki, I'm spotlighting you and I will turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you so much. It's so nice to be with all of you, and I'm excited to show you this roasted red cabbage steak is what we're going to start with tonight. And this is a really nice side dish, and so that's why I'm presenting it in that way tonight. But it really can almost be part of a main dish as well, you know, along with perhaps some mashed potatoes and maybe a salad. So, you know, maybe 3 things of that sort, a salad or some steamed greens or corn on the cob, kind of depending on the time of year. I really like this at this time of year because it's such a hearty vegetable, cruciferous, so colorful. It just feels like a nice addition to a plate with almost any savory combination of dishes. So I'm going to start with that, and I'll also say that I'm adding to it tonight a red pepper tahini sauce. This is really good even without that sauce. So if you wanted to save yourself the step, or you wanted to just serve it without it, it's really good without it as well. So we'll start with a head of red cabbage, and I've pulled off the outer leaves that are kind of tough and you know, kind of sticking out on the edge, and sliced off the bottom to give it a nice solid base to sit on. And then, you know, we don't have to be perfect with this, but I'm basically going to cut, you know, roughly 6 to 8 steaks, we'll call them, as we slice through this, roughly 3/4 of an inch or so. I've made them about 1/2 an inch before. I've made them 1 inch before, and I generally get about 6 to 8 out of you know, a standard head of cabbage. And I'm just, you know, it's just a little bit of muscle to get through. This one is a little bit smaller of a cabbage head. So I'm looking at this beautiful, you know, cross section, and I'm just going to place it as I cut these on a nice oven ready. In this case, it's a non-stick griddle that can be put into the oven. You could put it on a cookie sheet that has maybe a sill pad on it, or a silicone baking mat. So I'm going to basically just be slicing the remainder of these to end up with about 6, I think we'll have here. I've never made this with green cabbage, but I don't see why you couldn't. It would still be delicious. But this is so colorful when it's purple with the red cabbage, that I just love using this color. So we'll just kind of place these on our baking sheet just like this. That's our start. And then I'm going to just actually use a little pastry brush to put some balsamic vinegar on these. So I'm saying about 2 tablespoons. You know, it's really to taste. So if you wanted to use a little less or a little more, that would work too. You could even use a flavored vinegar, but a nice balsamic I think works well here. And I'm going to have enough vinegar to go back and just do a little splash on these a second time. And I do like to make sure that even the edges are kind of glazed with this, because as this roasts in the oven, it's going to begin to be kind of caramelized and get sweeter and kind of, you know, a little browner. So I'm using most of this because I have fewer slices than if I ended up with 8. I have a little vinegar left, but no big deal. And then I'm going to just sprinkle it with a little bit of pepper, black pepper, and a little bit of salt to taste. I do use salt in here, but if you're avoiding salt, just leave that out. And then I'm going to, my instructions say to just stick this now into an oven for 45 or 50 minutes at 400 degrees. And when it comes out, to glaze it with a mixture of 1 tablespoon of date syrup or maple syrup and 2 tablespoons of mustard, just a standard yellow mustard. And I have, I'm going to show you how that works, because actually you can do this step before or after the roasting. So I'll just show you what it looks like if we do it before. So I'll just mix together these 2 ingredients to make this little very quick glaze. And this is just going to add some extra flavor. I'm going to use the same brush. If you didn't have this kind of brush, you could certainly just use a spoon or a spatula to, you know, kind of drizzle this on. And I'm doing that same idea of just kind of quickly going to kind of almost like frosting this from top to bottom, from edge to edge, making sure that all of it's pretty closely covered, best possible, without getting too fussy. You can spend as much time on this as you want. I'm not going to worry too much. We're pretty close to what I had in mind there. And then it looks just like this, or without the glaze, either way. And then we're going to put that into a 400-degree oven for roughly 45 to 50 minutes. You want this to come out nice and tender. So I'll show you what it looks like. This pan is still warm, but not hot. And I glazed these. This is a full 50 minutes. And I'm going to show you what this looks like when we finish this. So I'm going to take one of these out to show you how we're going to serve this. Let me grab a nice spatula for this. And then we're going to make our sauce, and I'm going to show you how we finish it. But we'll leave this set aside for a moment as we make our sauce. So now we're going to put into a little blender these ingredients for our sauce. So we've got 1 red pepper that I have sauteed with a little garlic. I added the garlic right at the end. And what I did was just take a fresh red pepper and put it into a hot pan and just kind of move it around as it began to kind of caramelize. I just put water in here. I didn't use oil, but you could use oil if that's something that you like to use. And then added the garlic at the very end so that I didn't want the garlic to burn. So I added it just the last like 30 seconds, just till I could smell the aroma. And we have here this nice, beautiful, soft, you could roast this in the oven instead if you wanted to, but I just sauteed it on the, in a pan on the stove to get that same effect of roasted, grilled red pepper. And it's nice and sweet. If you wanted to take a quick shortcut, you could even buy the roasted red pepper that comes in a jar, which you can find in the section of like condiments, like the pickles and mustards and stuff. You can find some roasted red pepper in a jar that's just packed in water and salt. And you could use that if you wanted a little shortcut. So we're using the equivalent of 1 red pepper. If you were using the jar, I'd say probably about half a jar or about 6 ounces altogether is my guess. So we're putting the red pepper in here along with our other ingredients for our sauce. So we're going to have here our red pepper, our garlic. I'm adding our water. We've got half of a cup of water, 3/4 of a cup of tahini. Tahini is just a seed butter made from sesame seeds. So we're going to put that in here, and it's kind of going to give it this real rich texture that will be a lovely kind of dressing for these cabbage steaks. So I'm just putting this in here too. Just trying to get every bit of this lovely tahini, which gives it this just real buttery, rich flavor. And then I'm adding 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And I just wanted to show you a product I came across recently that I'm really enjoying in case you don't have a lemon handy. I actually bought an organic lemon powder on Amazon that is just dehydrated lemon. And you use like half a teaspoon of the powder, which just looks kind of like sugar. It's just a very, very fine grain powder, and mix it with 2 tablespoons of water for a lemon. So that's what I have here. I didn't have a lemon handy. So this is a very nice product to have handy. It's shelf stable. And although it's kind of an expensive package, as I'm recalling, it lasts forever because you only are using half a teaspoon at a time for a lemon. So I'm kind of enjoying that product. So I just thought I'd share that because it's kind of new to me. And so then I'm also adding a little salt and pepper, half teaspoon of each. And then we're going to just go ahead and blend this to our sauce. We'll call that done. There's some specks in here of the red pepper. You could go a little bit longer if you want to. This is a really lovely sauce that my daughter likes on everything, not just on these cabbage steaks. So she likes this over mashed potatoes or baked potatoes. My son likes this so much, he likes it as a salad dressing. So you may find that this is a handy sauce to have on hand during the week. So now I've got a lot of this, and I'll store the extra in a jar, but I just want to show you how we're going to kind of drizzle some over our lovely steaks here. And then we'll finish it off with a little bit of cilantro. And we have just an amazing, truly, this is really delicious and nice to serve holiday time perhaps, but certainly just any night of the week because it's really good. And they're very nice left over as well. So here's our cabbage steaks with our red pepper tahini sauce. Michelle?
Yeah, looks delicious, Vicki, and good to know about the lemon powder. So the first thing I'm making tonight is a squash and raw kale quinoa salad. It is from the Plant-Based Diet Revolution. If you haven't heard of Dr. Alan Desmond, he's an Irish gastroenterologist. He's great. I really like him. He's got this book, a lot of great recipes. So I have kale. I washed and I tore off the kale into little pieces. It's a huge bunch, so I'm splitting it up right now. And then it calls for an autumn squash, and I chose to use a delicata. It's one of our favorites. I like it. And if you're not used to, if you're not comfortable cutting squash, this is a lot easier than cutting into butternut. But if you don't want to cut into it at all, you can, the recipe calls for cutting it into wedges, but you don't have to. You could use already cut cubes. But what you do is cut off the ends of on both ends. And then you always want a steady surface before you try to cut something like this. And you put it down and then carefully with the knife, cut this in as evenly as possible into 2 halves, scoop out the seeds and that fibrous stuff, and then cut into like like an inch slices. So they make this, you can eat the skin or the peel, whatever you want to call that. So it's nice and it's pretty. And then the other part is sliced red onion. Now, Vicki and I are both using red things and cruciferous vegetables tonight. They're all really good for you. You can use any kind of onion you want, but when you can get some extra, like Vicki said, you could use the regular cabbage, but when you can get that extra punch of antioxidants, I like to do that. So that's what the red cabbage and the red onion do. And when I roasted it at 400, you can use a little spritz of oil if you want, or vegetable broth, or just plain. And I roasted it for about 30 minutes. I turned it over halfway through, and it just I have these. Let's see if I can. It just is nice and golden. Let's see if you can. See that? Let's see what that looks like. So I just think they're pretty. And then the red onion. And I cooked red kale. I mean, a red quinoa. Now I didn't do it the way he did it. I like the way, just the language, like when he talks about tumbling the food together and some other things that I thought were cute. I do want to point out, I did leave off 1 tablespoon of lemon juice in the dressing. But it's red, the salad part, red quinoa. So I just cooked it in the Instant Pot. I did a cup of quinoa, a cup and a quarter of water, and put it in for, I mean, some people just do 1 minute or 5 or 8, whatever makes the texture that you are comfortable with. So I have that, and I'm going to make a dressing now. So I have 1/3 of a cup of cashews. They say to soak it overnight, but you don't, if you have a high-speed blender, you don't need to do that. And if you think, oh, I forgot to soak them, then you can just hit it with some hot water for an hour or so. Got 3 tablespoons of water, tablespoon of lemon. Again, I did not put that in there. It says 1/2 clove of garlic, but I'm not messing around. I put the whole clove in. I like garlic. And a small bunch of parsley. It says chop, but I'm putting it into a high-speed blender, so I don't need to chop it. And I put the stems in too, because the stems have every bit as much of the nutrition in it. So I don't like to throw that out. And then I've got my Dijon mustard. And Dijon mustard, it helps activate. You get more benefit from the cruciferous vegetables when you have some mustard. So that's an extra benefit to this dressing. And then, as they say, I'm going to blitz it. Make some noise. Because there isn't as much volume in this, it's a little bit more important that you're going to have to stop and scrape down the sides. Smells good. By the way, the smell of the roasting squash and the red onion, it just made me ready for fall. It smelled so good and so fall-like. That's going to have some specks still, but just for time, I'm going to stop it there. So I'm going to just put, I mean, you could put it, you have a large enough bowl, you can put it all in the one big bowl or serving dish. I'm just going to plate it. Put some quinoa. Let's see how I can do this without spilling. And you can use whatever kind of quinoa you want, or if you want a different grain. I mean, quinoa is actually a seed, but it's a quasi grain. It acts like a grain. And the red is kind of, again, more antioxidants in there with that color. It works well too for veggie burgers. It has a little bit more of a meaty look and feel to it. So I've got that. And then I'm just putting some few slices of the onion. Squash. And the problem with these, when you're roasting, you want to try to get the pieces uniform so they cook evenly. Again, the outer part of the baking dish is hotter, so the bigger pieces should go there. And you can use, people have all different preferences for what temperatures they like to roast at. I did it at 400, but a lot, you see them all different, 350, 300, 450, 475. So just what you like. And if you're making other things, then you can just, other vegetables while you have the oven heating up to save some energy and make better use of your time. Do more while you have the, if you have room on your baking sheet, by all means, go ahead. And you can use any kind of squash, like I said, and if you want to buy it already prepared, that's fine too. I just like the look of these slices. A lot of colors, a lot of different, see that? And that's simple. Massaging the kale is an important step. I use the regular curly kale for this, but you can use whatever kind you like. If you're not really thrilled with kale yet, I recommend starting with the lancenato, also called dino kale, Tuscan kale, or black kale, just to confuse you a little bit with all those names. But massaging them either with the lemon juice, it helps, that acid helps break it down. Avocado breaks it down. Really, even just massaging with your hands will help break it down. Makes the leaves more tender, a little less bitter. And the lacinato is less bitter to begin with. So, but pick what you like that you will eat. That's the important part. And that's what it looks like. Back to you, Vicki.
Thank you, Michelle. That looks great. I just thought I'd show you this pan of the finished. I just topped the rest of the cabbage steaks with the sauce and a little cilantro. And you could put this out on a big platter if you're serving a group, and it's just a really nice side dish. Okay, so now we're going to get into our dessert. And I'm making an apple butter oatmeal cake. And so we're going to start with some whole rolled oats. So we've got 3/4 cup of oats, and to that I'm adding some date sugar. So it's very much like it's a 1-to-1 swap for white sugar in a recipe if you're using this. And it's suggested that you, if you're using date sugar in another recipe, that you cut back on your dry ingredients like the flour for approximately 25% of it. So I'm adding the date sugar to my oats, and then I'm adding some flax, which will be basically what my egg would be, and then some baking powder, and then all of my beautiful spices. So I've got some apple pie spice, some cinnamon. It's just a great smell. And this gets you in the mood for fall too. So we'll mix this together, these nice dry ingredients, very simple stuff you already have. I actually added a pinch of salt already to the oats, so that's in here too. And then now we're going to do our wet ingredients. And you don't even need to really have a separate bowl, but just to keep it clear what we're doing, I do have a separate container here. And so we're going to add, so we have got 2 mashed bananas, and then I'm adding some apple butter. And I just thought I'd share this brand because I do like this brand of Eden with they have an organic apple butter that's just apples and apple juice concentrate. So there's no added sugar, which I like. So you can find other apple butters if that's not important to you, but that's one I like. And I can find that, you can find that at Whole Foods. So then we've got our apple butter that we're adding. If you can't find apple butter, you could probably use applesauce even, but the apple butter is kind of a really nice concentrated flavor, which makes this just a delicious fall cake. And then I'm adding to that some milk. I'm using soy milk, which is just soy beans and water, an organic version, and about 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then we've got all of our wet stuff. We'll just add that together. So the only sweetener in here is fruit. We've got a lot of it. We've got our apple butter, our bananas, and then our date sugar on the other side with our dry. And so now that we've got all of this together, we'll just kind of add it all into a single bowl. Gather up all of that flavor. You want all of that lovely mixture. And then we're going to just put that all together. So now we'll do some mixing. All in one bowl here. You don't even need a mixer. We're just going to incorporate all of the date sugar, if you haven't used it before, is kind of a dusty texture. So it's a very fine texture that, very powdery, kind of like cocoa would be. So you may even see that dust kind of rising up here. Kind of like flour, that's that fine. And now we're almost mixed here, doing well. Give it a final stir. And then we're going to put it into a pan. I like to use a silicone pan. I'll show you that in a moment. If you don't have a silicone pan, you can just basically use any baking dish that you like. I'm using basically an 8-inch here, and I lined it with parchment paper. And I'm just going to put all of this batter in here. It mixes up into a lovely cake this time of year. It's just such a wonderful aroma baking in the oven. So we'll just gather up all of our batter here. It's a nice thick batter. The reason I'm using the parchment paper is because I didn't use any oil in here, and it helps to make sure nothing sticks. And at the end, if we want to, we can even lift it out by the handles. You wouldn't need to do this. You can bake it in any container you want. You could even put it into probably a pie pan if you wanted to make a round version of this. So this is our cake, and I just created this recently, and I had some fun with it, making some little decorations for the top. So I'm going to show you what I did to make it kind of pretty, extra pretty on top. So we've got our cake ready to go in the oven with one last step. I'm taking an apple, and I just sliced off the top and the bottom with a knife and just took off the skin real quickly. And then now I'm going to just create some thin slices. And use a cookie cutter with, like, any shape you like, whether it's stars or, hearts or whatever you like. I actually have an apple, and so I'm going to play with that here, and we'll create a little apple shape. And actually, I will say that it's not really a cookie cutter. It's actually for pie pastry. So it's a little delicate, and so we'll hope that this works. It seems to be working. I think I need kind of a thin slice in order for this to cut through nicely. And so it's working. I'm getting a nice apple. So I'm going to just decorate the top, and I'll show you what this looks like. And then we can put this into the oven. You can put as many of these or any other shape, maybe maple leaves or something like that, whatever cookie cutters you have. And then we're going to bake this in the oven at 350 until it feels nice and firm to the touch, about 30 or 35 minutes. And it ends up looking like this. So I'm going to slice a piece just so you can see what it looks like, because it's got a really nice moist texture. We're going to just take out a piece here and plate it. And we've got our snacking cake already. Michelle?
That looks delicious, Vicki. Okay, the next I'm going to make a pumpkin spice latte. You see them all over the place starting, around Labor Day. The one from that company that's on pretty much every corner in every store. It has 300 for 16-ounce serving. It has about almost 400 calories, 14 grams of fat, so it's about 130 calories, 50 grams of sugar, which is a ton. And that is actually very inflammatory. Dr. Kim Williams, which by the way, we have a conference coming up for PPOD next week, and have the, just the pleasure of seeing Dr. Kim Williams. He's the past president of the American College of Cardiology. He's really good, but he thinks sugar is more of a concern to cardiologists than fat, actually, because of what it does to the fats, it does to the cholesterol, the lipids, it does a lot. So anyway, I think this is a nice thing to make yourself. It is super easy. It's only 10 minutes. It's a lot less expensive. It's a lot less caloric. So I'm going to start with 3/4 of a cup of the plant. I just use almond milk, but you could use, if you like coconut or cashew, whatever you like. And 1/4 cup of water, and I'm just going to let that come to a simmer. And I have actual, like some of the pumpkin spice lattes that are available don't have any actual pumpkin in them. They've got a pumpkin flavored syrup. So this has, but I will say that company does put some pumpkin puree in there. This is actual like organic pumpkin puree. It doesn't have to be organic, but it shouldn't be the pumpkin spice, the pumpkin pie filling. That's not what we want. And just another little tip about that, like pumpkin puree is really good for dogs, their digestion, but the pumpkin pie filling, very bad for dogs. Dogs cannot have nutmeg. It's very toxic for them. So especially near the holidays, watch if you're serving something with that, be careful that your dogs don't get into it. So I'm going to bring this, like I said, to a simmer, and then I'm adding, I've got some maple syrup. If you don't want the caffeine, you can get decaffeinated espresso, or you can just make a super strong cup of coffee. You only need 1/4 cup of it. So I'm gonna let this come to a simmer. And then I've got maple syrup. I've got, so that the recipe you'll see lists all the individual spices. I don't feel like it. So I just used a pumpkin spice mix. And I like the one from Trader Joe's. You can still get it, but in another week or two, it'll be out. And once they're out, they're out. You can't get it anymore. And I like this one because the recipe does call for cardamom, which I love. This also has lemon peel in it, but it does not have the, I think, clove. But I really like this. So every year I get one. I put it in just in my coffee as a rule too. So then after, just try to get that to a simmer a little bit faster. I've got, so what I did was I took, pumpkin pie spices are all different. They have different ingredients. So if you're opting for the way that I did it and just going for the pumpkin pie spice, you want to start with a 1/2 teaspoon. With any of these things, you can start with 2 to 3 tablespoons of pumpkin. You might want to start with 2 just to see if you like it. You can add more, but you can't take it out. Same thing with the pumpkin spice mix. And you can use date syrup if you prefer. I've got maple syrup for this. So what I'm going to do is pretend that this is already simmering, just to not take up so much time. And I'm going to add the maple syrup, the pumpkin. I use about 3 tablespoons. I like that. So you're getting good nutrition in this, actually, which is nice. Nothing to feel guilty about. Not that I'm saying you should feel guilty if you have the other kind, but I'm just saying this is actually good for you. So mix that in a bit more. Got that. I've got the spices. It calls for vanilla extract. I'm a big fan of the powder. So if you have vanilla powder, the rule of thumb is about, if the recipe would call for a teaspoon of vanilla extract, you use about 1/4 teaspoon of the powder. So if this is calling for half a teaspoon, as we do the math, a quarter, a half, an eighth, 16th. So these little gadgets, they're like, if you've seen them, they're little measuring spoons that are pinch, dash, and smidge. And the smallest one is about a 16th of a teaspoon. So you can use that, or you can eyeball in the eighth of a teaspoon measure, or just use the other, use the extra. So I'm gonna put that in there. And the coffee. Make sure I can have everything. And the vanilla was in there too. A little bit, just a couple turns of the pepper. And just whisk this. It's kind of a big whisk. And you can serve this cold, but in this, well, in this weather, you might want it cold and hot in the same day. We're all over the place, but I like it kind of, I like it warm. And because these are natural products, they're going to settle. So I mean, you store this, what you don't use in the refrigerator, store this in the refrigerator, but you'll see it separate. So you just want to give it another stir. It's very little time, and I've got my kind of in a Halloween mood here, so I've got my witch's brew mug, and it nicely fills that up. And then if you'd like, it's not whole food plant-based necessarily, it's plant-based, but it's a whipped cream, it's a plant-based whipped topping. And you can just kind of float that on top. You can skip it if you don't want. I mean, there are fat calories in here, but it is kind of tasty there. And that is your pumpkin spice latte. And now I'm going to make something to go with that. I have Rolos, which I used to love before I went vegan and found out I was allergic to milk, but I love them and I haven't seen anything that works like that. So I am making, I'm melting the chocolate, and just to give you some hints about that, you can put it in a microwave, you can use a chocolate melter. If you're going to do it on the stove like I do, you want to be sure you're putting a heat safe bowl on top of another bowl, the pot. Make sure there's no water. You want it to cover so no water can get into the chocolate. If you get water into melting chocolate, it's going to seize up and it's a mess. So be sure there's no water, no way that the steam can come up and get into the chocolate that's melting. And you want to not have the water touch the bottom of the dish or pan, whatever you're melting it in. You could use a heat safe glass dish too if you want, and just break the chocolate into smaller pieces and keep stirring. You can turn the heat off after a bit and the residual heat will melt it. So now for the caramel part, which I love. Dates are already naturally caramely tasting. Caramely, that's the word. Anyway, take about 11 dates. These things are all going to depend on your preference and sort of the state of things. So a lot of times dates can be pretty chewy, or they can be like perfectly ready to go. So the first batch I did, they were a little firmer. You want to always wash your dates, take the stem off, the pit out, and give it a look, because they can have mold in it sometimes, or seeds. It's okay if they have that white fibrous thing. It's just going to be a little chewier, but those are okay to use. So I have them clean, pitted, and destemmed. Put that in there. You can use whatever kind of nut butter or seed butter that you like. I'm using almond butter. And depending on how, like the shape of your almond, or whatever nut butter you're using, if it's runny, you're going to need less. If the dates are pretty dry and the almond butter or whatever is pretty dry, it's going to take a little bit more work. But I used about a tablespoon before, even though it calls for half. And then I also like, even though they're delicious just like this, but you can What did I do with it? I love when I do this. Oh, it's right here, right in front of my face. I like to put a little bit of the vanilla and a little bit of maple syrup. So I'm just putting a little tiny, I might not use the maple syrup tonight, but just a little pinch of vanilla powder. And if it needs a little bit more moisture, I'm going to add the maple syrup. And this is going to make a wrap. If your dates are really firm, because ideally you want to be able to push on them a little bit without, getting a workout in. If they're firm, you want to soak them for a while. Break down the sides. This one's good. You can use whatever you want. It calls for peanut butter. You can use tahini if you already had it out, like Vicky's recipe. You scrape it. It is sticky. I'm not going to lie about that. So you're going to be washing your hands a few times. So this is what it looks like to start. And what you do is roll it into balls or little, whatever shape you want. You could put it into a mold if you want. But once you get them in the shape that you want, you're going to put them in the freezer to firm up a bit. So about 10 minutes. And then you can work on the shape a little bit more, put them back in and then dip them. You want them cold before you before you coat them. So you can use just a spoon. You can dip them in if you want to. You can use something like this, which is just something I got at Michael's, just to put the piece on here and dip it in, or hold this over the pan and with a spoon pour the chocolate over it, however much you want. Like maybe you don't want the whole thing covered, you still get the taste of the chocolate without having as much chocolate on it. So you can do it that way, but I have the chocolate melting just to tell you how to do that. And then I already dipped some. And then I put them back in the freezer, and they're really better, like right out of the freezer. And they get I would tell you what my son said, but it would get bleeped. And he loved these. And that's what I kind of made little cubes. And they're really good. I'm not gonna lie, they're really, really good. So they have that nice caramely taste. And these won't last. I'm going to make another batch, but they're few too many steps to take you through the whole thing. So again, I blitzed it. I'm gonna, put those into balls or cubes, molds, whatever I want, into the freezer to firm. Make sure they're nice and cold before I cover them with chocolate, then back into the freezer where we keep them until we're eating them. So that is that. You have your little snack of the pumpkin spice latte and some Rolos. So I hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much. That all looks delicious as always. I'm going to add Vicky to the spotlight so we can get to some questions. Real quick, I am going to put the link to the survey that I mentioned earlier in the chat. If everyone wouldn't mind just taking a few moments to fill this out, it'd be much appreciated. So we do have just a couple of questions so far. If anyone else has any other questions for Vicky and Michelle about these specific recipes, or it could be about cooking, plant-based cooking in general, feel free to add them to the chat now. But the first two questions we do have are actually about your first recipe, Vicky. So the first one is just saying, if you have leftover sauce, how long will it stay in the fridge?
So I think it should stay, 5 days or so is my guess, and it probably could even be frozen. I haven't frozen it, and we never end up with having it that long. So I haven't had it, beyond that amount of time. But I would say it should be fine because, if you're keeping it refrigerated, it's really becomes kind of like a, it's just the butter, the nut butter, seed butter, I should say, the tahini along with the vegetables. And it's fine refrigerated for several days. So yeah, it's really good. I'm looking forward to this. Is really nice just over with rice or, a green vegetable, or yeah, this will be dinner for us tonight.
It looks so good. Everything looks so good. And you said for the sauce, Vicky, I mean, obviously you used it in this one delicious way, but you said you also sometimes use it as a dressing and some other ways as well.
Yeah, my son loves using this as a salad dressing. So, I mean, I didn't intend for it to be that originally. One time I actually served this for people to add their own extra. I serve it on the side sometimes when I, serve this. We had several people to dinner. We were eating outside on our back porch, and I had this here, with these steaks and a salad next to it with the dressing. And he didn't know. He just took the salad from a bowl and added this as a sauce. And ever since, he really likes it as a dressing. My daughter really likes it over vegetables and over mashed potatoes, kind of like a gravy. So you could definitely warm this and use it in that way if you wanted to. But yeah, it's just a really lovely, thing to drizzle over. It's good over this, obviously the cabbage, but it would be good over broccoli or asparagus or any other way you might think of it. But I think over starches as well. So rice and, even probably pasta if it was warmed, but definitely over potatoes or baked potato is really nice.
That all sounds so good.
Yeah.
Getting me so hungry. Yeah. So nice to have a versatile sauce, and especially one pre-made and, in the fridge to go grab quickly whenever you want. Love it.
Yeah. And it's a really nice, rich sauce too. So you don't in any way feel like you're missing something. Sometimes when people are new to this way of eating, they are worried that they may feel like they're, sacrificing something, or, that it's somehow a hardship. And it's kind of the opposite. I find that many people, especially when you're using something like this, like a rich sauce, that in fact, it's just like a wonderful surprise that it's, deliciously thick and rich and creamy.
Absolutely. Looks very good. I definitely got to try it for myself.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question, it came right at the end of your first recipe. So I think it was maybe meant for you, but if either of you have an opinion, someone was wondering what would be a great alternative to using kosher salt.
So what is the thought about what is the, is someone the person who asked that question, it's a great question, but are they trying to eliminate salt, reduce salt? Because really you could kind of swap a different salt if you didn't want to use that specific salt and you had a different salt. But if you're avoiding salt, I'd say, at least in my recipe, just leave it out and maybe add more pepper, lemon, maybe more herbs. So kind of depends what your goal is, I would say.
Okay.
Maybe we can find out more about what that person was thinking.
Absolutely. It looks like they're still here. John Luke. It looks like you asked the question about salt. If you feel like Vicky's answer was sufficient, by all means leave it. But if you want to clarify, feel free to, add a couple notes in the chat and we can get back to that in a moment. The next question is for Michelle, and someone was wondering if you add coconut oil to the chocolate you use for the Rolos.
Good question. I don't use coconut oil. Family, high cholesterol. So by the way, this is super sticky. I just melted chocolate. I should have pointed that out. If I melt chocolate and I dip it, I never have a problem. So I don't add the oil on the chips. The chips are also, I try not to use chips because chips have stabilizers and things because they're meant to hold their shape in baked goods. So it's not as smooth to me for dipping or coating, but most people have those on hand. So they can go ahead and use the coconut oil, but I just don't ever do that. I just use Good Bar dark chocolate.
All right, good to know. John Luke did say, Vicky, you answered the question really well. So perfect.
Okay.